It starts right now. Horrifying new details in the Capitol Gazette shooting that left 5 dead. How the suspect barricaded staffers into the newsroom and why a man who had raised so many red flags for years wasn't stopped. A CNN exclusive, a Trump administration official taking his red pen to a UN resolution, one combating hate speech, the official disputing the idea that racism is a threat to democracy. Where did that idea come from? And who may I say is calling? A radio shock jock says he pretended to be a U.S. senator and phoned the White House, and President Trump called him back from Air Force One. How he did it, and hear for yourself what the president told him about his Supreme Court pick. Coming up.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to The Lead. I'm Jake Tapper. We begin with breaking news in the national lead. Police are revealing more horrifying details about what happened yesterday at the Capitol Gazette newspaper in Annapolis, Maryland. The suspect, police say, wanted to kill as many people as he could. He worked his way through the newsroom, hunting and shooting innocent victims, even barricading the back door so the journalists could not escape. The suspect had been upset for years, apparently, about a 2011 story the newspaper had written about a court case about his harassing and stalking a high school classmate. A reporter with WBAL-TV spoke with that woman yesterday, and she said, quote, "He's an effing nut job." And the woman said she had warned police, "He will be your next mass shooter." The former publisher and editor of the Capitol Gazette, Tom Marquardt, told the Baltimore Sun, quote, "I remember telling our attorneys, this is a guy who is going to come in and shoot us." CNN's Tom Foreman joins me now from Annapolis. And Tom, you have some new reporting about the suspect. What can you tell us?
Yeah, Jake, we now know that 4 years ago he was fired from a job as a subcontractor to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Federal Bureau. And what they cited at the time were security suitability concerns. We don't know exactly what that means. We know that he sued them for some back wages, and it was never clarified what that was about. What is very clear is that this was a very troubled man.
The fellow was there to kill as many people as he could kill.
The attack was planned, the newspaper a specific target, the weapon a pump-action shotgun. That's what police said, even as the suspect, Jared Ramos, was denied bail on 5 counts of first-degree murder. President Trump, a frequent and harsh critic of the media, weighed in too.
Journalists, like all Americans, should be free from the fear of being violently attacked while doing their job.
The glass shattered. I turned around to see it.
But amid recollections of the horror, police and folks at the paper are also sharing stories of that 38-year-old man's apparently simmering rage and years of warning signs.
He was going down our newsroom, starting from the front, just continually shooting people.
People at the paper say it started when the Capitol Gazette covered a criminal harassment claim against him by a woman in 2011. He was convicted and tried to sue the newspaper for defamation. After a relentless campaign to keep his claim active, it was thrown out. But by 2013, police say he was routinely raging online against the newspaper.
I had alerted my staff to call 911 if anybody resembling him came into the room.
Threats, hints of violence, furious obscenities.
You've all looked at the social media platforms. There's clearly a history there.
Detectives had talked to the newspaper's staff, but
the Capitol Gazette did not wish to pursue criminal charges. There was a fear that doing so would exacerbate an already flammable situation.
And yet police say he bought a shotgun anyway, legally purchased about a year ago. And that's what he used to storm through the open newsroom where some escaped, some hid, and one was shot trying to open a door the alleged shooter had barricaded.
The person is still shooting.
When police found the suspected gunman, he was hiding under a desk. Intern Anthony Messenger describes the scene.
It was chaos. The office was kind of in shambles. Unfortunately, we had to pass 2 bodies of our colleagues, which was something that nobody should ever have to stomach.
Now, amid questions of how all of that played out, begins the long mourning by families and friends of the victims. Robert Hiaasen, assistant editor and columnist, known as Big Rob, not just because he was tall.
He was just this big, generous, gentle guy.
Gerald Fishman, editorial page editor, quiet, reserved, with an encyclopedia knowledge of everything. John McNamara loved sports and history, a jack of all trades and a fantastic person. Rebecca Smith, sales assistant, kind and considerate and willing to help. And Wendy Winters, editor, reporter, and columnist. Her life was a gift to everyone who knew her. Despite their grief, the surviving staff is doing what journalists do, reporting on what happened, with one big difference. The first editorial page after the shooting was blank. Often when these things happen, people say, how is it possible that this could have been seen? In this case, it's everyone's saying, how is it possible that people didn't see it coming? Because many simply did. The question is, why wasn't anything done to head it off before it got here? Jake?
Tom Foreman, thank you so much.
This is CNN Breaking News.
And I want to turn to some more breaking news in our politics lead. CNN is breaking the news right now that one of President Trump's political appointees at the State Department, a Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, pushed for a United Nations statement to soften language in the statement that condemned racism and xenophobia. This official also disputed the idea that leaders have a duty to condemn hate speech. CNN's Michelle Kaczynski brings us this exclusive story.
The State Department's new Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration apparently has some big problems with two seemingly benign UN documents. In one, a resolution called The Incompatibility Between Democracy and Racism, which is adopted without vote every few years in much the same form. Andrew Veprick, identified by his initials, outright disputes that officials have a duty to condemn racism, or that combating racism and xenophobia complements democratic multicultural societies, writing, "What's the evidence?" Some commentators assert that a unifying culture, as opposed to multiculturalism, is the best way to promote social trust and combat racism. Also crossed out are references to racism in political parties or groups that seek to normalize racism. In another statement on the importance of preventing war crimes, Veprick strikes out some simple thanks for the outgoing High Commissioner for Human Rights, saying that's because the UN official had criticized Trump.
Is this not an incitement for others to attack journalists?
Including for the president's attacks on the press.
It's time to expose the crooked media deceptions.
Where one document says, we've witnessed a discouraging trend of populism and nationalism, as well as rising signs of xenophobia, Veprick has crossed all that out. Writing in the margins, the drafters say populism and nationalism as if these are dirty words. There are millions of Americans who would describe themselves as adhering to these concepts, maybe even the president. And he doesn't like the word xenophobia due to concerns over the malleability of the term now and in the future. What real or perceived offense is next to be considered xenophobic, he writes. The State Department responding to these attempted edits with some standard language of its own, a no comment. I did reach out directly to Veprick by email. He did not respond, but he's raised concerns before when he was named to this position, and he has been a Foreign Service officer. Most recently, he was at the White House working with Stephen Miller, policy advisor. So Veprick worked on the Domestic Policy Council, but Senate Democrats raised concerns over his level of experience, over his hardline views on immigration, which are known among his colleagues, and that he wasn't the right fit for this job. Again, that was Senate Democrats saying this. But we did talk to a former administration official also who has experience at the UN and in the National Security Council. This is somebody who worked in the Obama administration. He felt that these kinds of comments on these types of documents were explosive in his words, and show that this administration also has a thin skin for criticism. Jay.
Michelle, just to be clear, we don't know what happened with these edits, right? I mean, he did them, and we don't know if the State Department sent them to the UN or not. They might have. We don't know. They won't answer.
No, and also, just after he made some of these edits, according to a source, the U.S. left the Human Rights Council. So it's kind of a moot point where this went, or whether other nations would have listened to these suggested edits. The point is the types of things that he wrote, and there's a lot in these documents that we have. We've only showed you part of them, but it goes along that same theme of questioning, you know, why are we calling out political parties who are accused of using racist speech? So the sources we talked to found this so surprising. That's why these documents leaked out. But where this went after the point, we don't know. I mean, we don't know the final, you know, version of some of these edits.
It's still interesting. Kirsten, let's bring in my panel right now. Kirsten, you hear about individuals with these thoughts in the Trump administration, whether it's Stephen Miller or this individual.
Or the president.
Or the President Trump.
Because, I mean, when you look at the words that he's objecting to, you know, what's, you know, condemning racism, how is that out of bounds? That's where we've come to, is that now we actually are going to say that it's dangerous to condemn racism.
No, we have to be careful. He's not condemning racism. He's not condemning racism.
He's saying that whether or not it's compatible with democracy.
Yes, he's splitting hairs. He's basically saying, you know, why are we saying that leaders have a duty to combat racism? Normally, for these types of documents.
I mean, that actually was what I was saying.
Go ahead.
I mean, so now we are now saying that you don't have a duty to condemn racism. And I think that this was something that most reasonable people would agree on, that a leader should not be engaging in racist behavior, and if racist behavior happens, that they would condemn it. But we've seen with the president that he doesn't do that. And these words are not actually that malleable. Like xenophobia isn't actually a malleable word. They can look it up in the dictionary. It has a meaning, and it means you have a sort of irrational fear of people who are from other countries. So if they don't like the definition of it, and they don't like someone calling them xenophobia, that's one thing, but it's a real thing, and they can't just pretend like it's some vague term that we don't know what it means.
So look, first of all, I'll condemn racism.
Right.
It's terrible, right? Nobody's pro-racism in this administration, so I obviously take umbrage with that. Number one, another 2 point maybe on this. I don't know Mr. Veprick. I don't know him at all, but you know who I do know? The State Department? My West Point classmate, Mike Pompeo. Great guy, and I guarantee you he'll condemn racism from the seventh floor on down. I promise you that. So I don't know what this document fully entails. I don't know if they've seen it over there, had a chance to investigate it. But if it is racist in any sense, I promise you, the secretary will speak out forcefully about it. He's a guy who's bringing swagger back to the State Department. He's a guy who is
Did he condemn
honorable.
the president for saying shithole countries?
I don't know.
What do you mean you don't know? You just said you know for sure that you will condemn it.
Because if it's in his department, Kristen, if it's in his department, right, and this is existing, and this is a racist document, I guarantee that Mike will speak out about it.
How is the president talking about shithole countries not in his department?
Because it's a disputed fact, right, whether that actually occurred or not to begin with, right?
I think, just to be clear, I think the dispute was whether the president said shithole or shithouse. I mean, just to...
Right.
Well, Jake, again, right? So again...
Yeah.
You know, I'm not defending that. I don't know if the president said it or not, and whether the president has a view of a country that's unfavorable or not unfavorable. I don't think that's a racist comment that he makes about.
It is racist when you consider that he wants no reason.
What do you make of all this, Jackie?
It seems like he was applying the both sides logic that we heard the president talk about in Charlottesville to this UN document. It struck me just reading through the edits that he made. It seemed like he was applying like campaign logic to this. Like, we don't want to be hit with this later. We don't want to be on the receiving end of this. That's how I read it. That's what they were concerned about.
And we're splitting hairs here because that's what he's doing. He's splitting hairs. I wouldn't say that based on this, I would not say that this person appears to be a racist. I would say, why question this language?
Right.
Language that people have not questioned for years in one of the cases of the documents. I mean, it's boilerplate language that keeps coming up. People are like, okay, right.
But the thing that really that made me think that was it said something to the effect of we can't condemn everything that people say, which is something you hear from politicians when someone says something and they're asked to comment about it. Someone in their party, for example. That you don't usually hear that sort of thing in a UN document. I'm not rationalizing it, but that's what rung very familiar to my ears.
All right, everyone stick around. We've got a lot more to talk about. We have more breaking news coming up. A new report says the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein felt used by the White House when James Comey was fired. We'll bring that story to you next and talk about it with the panel. Stay with us. We have some breaking news just in. The New York Times reports that Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein repeatedly expressed anger about how the White House used him, in his view, to rationalize the firing of former FBI Director James Comey. This was in the days following the ouster of the FBI director. You might remember Rosenstein wrote a memo outlining all the alleged problems he had with Comey's actions leading up to the 2016 election, having to do with how he handled the Hillary Clinton email investigation. The White House then used that to justify firing Comey. The New York Times reports that Rosenstein, according to one person with whom he spoke shortly after the firing, was, quote, shaken, unsteady, and overwhelmed. My political panel's back with me. Jackie, your initial response.
Oh my gosh, someone get that man a hug. I mean, but you're a grown up. You signed the letter, you stood by it. I mean, he stood by it when he talked to Congress about it, and what did he think was going to be done with it? They were going to put it in a file and say, oh, this is going in his personnel file now.
Right.
No, this is an explosive letter. And of course it was going to be used. And you made this point. It's not like during the break, it's not like people haven't stepped down from that position before if they weren't happy with it.
Right. And I want to get your reaction to this, David. One passage of this New York Times report. Rosenstein alternately defended his involvement, expressed remorse at the tumult it unleashed, said the White House had manipulated him, fumed how the media had portrayed the events, and said the full story would vindicate him, said the people with whom the Times interviewed, who in recent weeks described the previously undisclosed episode. Sounds like a lot of emotions going on.
Right. I mean, like we said, he's a grown-ass man, right? Deal with it, buddy. You're the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, Harvard Law grad. He's a grown-up. If you don't want to participate in this, at the outset, you leave your resignation on the desk and you walk out of the Department of Justice. He wrote the memo. He had to know what was in the content. He signed it, sent it out, participated. Now it sounds like he's having a little buyer's remorse on the thing. You can't have it both ways, right? You can't have it both ways.
So, Kirsten, it's entirely possible to believe that Rosenstein viewed Comey's actions negatively about how he handled the Hillary Clinton email investigation, that actually was his feeling. But he had to have known that that wasn't why President Trump fired him.
Right, because the idea that that would be the motivation for Trump just strains credulity. So I think he did know, and maybe he was unhappy at the way he was portrayed in the press. And I understand it's upsetting when you get attacked, when you are under a media storm and a media storm's coming after you. It is very stressful. It is very upsetting. But I think the writing was on the wall. When that letter was written, and he knew what he was doing, and we know that he knew what he was doing. So he should have made that decision before he helped President Trump, give President Trump cover at least, for 12 hours until he came out and said the real reason that he fired Trump.
So a typical Trump news cycle. We have some more breaking news. CNN has learned that special counsel prosecutors say that Michael Flynn, the president's former national security advisor, is not yet ready to be sentenced. And special counsel Robert Mueller is requesting another 60 days. Flynn, of course, has been cooperating with the investigation after pleading guilty. The news that prosecutors are not yet ready to set a sentencing hearing suggests that Flynn may still be in the process of cooperating with investigators. Your response, Jackie?
My gosh, I would imagine they're nervous over at the White House when they hear that he is still talking, and it doesn't seem like he's been reached out to lately.
Now, you're the lawyer at the table, so give us
I play one on this show.
Yeah.
But stepping aside from your defender of Trump and your Republican hat, what might that mean?
Look, there's more there, obviously, right? This is a guy he's the first guy in the queue. He's been the first guy that the Department of Justice talked to. It means that there's something new, right, that they've uncovered that he can offer some insight on, and that can't be good, right? I mean, you think that they've asked him everything possible under the sun. They keep turning over rocks. They find something new, and so he's participating. So I don't think it's great, whatever it is, but I thought he'd have been sentenced and done early on. But the fact that he isn't is not a great sign.
It also shows that Mueller is not planning on wrapping the investigation in the next couple days.
Big surprise. We never really thought that he was. These investigations take a long time. I think the way the Republicans have sort of convinced at least their supporters that this is dragging on for some inhumane amount of time is a real coup, because it's not accurate. It takes a long time to do an investigation of this depth, and I think to do it properly.
And to Chris's point, when Director Mueller did the investigation of the Ravens, right, involving domestic violence situation there, I mean, he went to the mail room. He knew this when the mail got delivered, when it was open. I mean, this guy turns over every rock. He knew better how the Ravens operation operated than their GM did. And so I promise you, this guy's doing a thorough investigation. And it's great. So the American public, when he's done, should feel confident that there's nothing there when he finds nothing.
All right. Whether or not he finds nothing, I'm glad you're expressing support for Special Counsel Mueller. So everyone stay right there. How a comedian got a call back from President Trump from Air Force One. Stay with us. Politics now, as he gets close to naming his Supreme Court nominee, his second one. President Trump quietly and strategically met with 6 senators who could be key in the confirmation process. With a decision expected within the next week or so, President Trump is not giving himself much time to win over potentially critical votes. CNN's Caitlin Collins picks up our coverage from the White House.
President Trump on deadline for one of the most consequential decisions of his presidency, hoping to nominate a new Supreme Court justice in less than 2 weeks. Sources tell CNN the administration will name their pick to replace Justice Anthony Kennedy by July 9th, even though Kennedy doesn't officially retire until the end of the month. The New York Times reporting that the White House conducted a quiet campaign to create an opening on the court, not pressuring 81-year-old Kennedy directly, but assuring him his seat was in good hands.
Throughout his nearly 30 years on the Supreme Court, Justice Kennedy has been praised by all for his dedicated and dignified service.
Trump promising to choose from a list of conservative judges the White House published last fall.
It will be somebody from that list. So we have now boiled it down to about 25 people.
Fulfilling a campaign promise that could transform the court for decades.
If we put another 2 or perhaps 3 justices on, that's really what's going to be, that will happen. And that'll happen automatically, in my opinion, because I am putting pro-life justices on the court.
A razor-thin majority in the Senate has sent the White House into overdrive to mobilize support. Trump dining with key senators Thursday night who could determine the court's future, including 3 Democrats who voted to confirm his last nominee, Justice Neil Gorsuch. The decision promising to shift the balance of power on the court and throw landmark decisions on abortion, same-sex marriage, and affirmative action into jeopardy. Kennedy's vacancy setting the stage for an epic fight in Washington.
Our Republican colleagues in the Senate should follow the rule they set in 2016. Not to consider a Supreme Court justice in an election year.
This is not 2016. There aren't the final months of a second-term constitutionally lame-duck presidency with a presidential election fast approaching.
So, Jake, we're only 9 days away from when sources say the president is going to name his next Supreme Court nominee, and the president realizes that isn't a lot of time to move, so he's trying to woo these senators. He knows there's not a lot of room to spare here, so he knows that if he's going to move, he's going to get these people to vote for his nominee, he's got to move fast. Jake.
All right, Caitlin Collins, thank you so much. Let's bring the panel back in. I don't know, Kirsten, if there's more pressure on the red state Democrats up for re-election or on the 2 Republicans who support abortion rights, Murkowski and Collins. That's a lot of pressure for all of them. What do you think President Trump should do in terms of a nominee to help him get support?
I think you should nominate a woman. And I think that would probably help at least the 2 female Republican senators, who I think really are the ones that everyone is focused on, is what are they going to do? They're the only ones that have the real influence here. And you know, and I also think I've seen Leonard Leo of the Federalist Society come out and say we don't feel under pressure to choose a woman because of the current composition of the court. And I like Leonard a lot, but I'm not quite sure what he means by that, since there are twice as many men on the court as women. So why would that composition make sense to you when women are more than half of the population? So it would be a good opportunity for him to bring a little more equity. And also I think it would be something that would be appreciated probably by those female senators.
Do you have any favorites in the race here?
Yes, sir. Look, I again, obviously don't agree with Chris. I think we should pick the best jurist. If it's a woman, great. If it's a man, great. I think we should look for the best jurist. I think there's a wide range of folks that are really qualified on the list. Two friends of mine, Tom Hardiman, who was the kind of runner-up last time, and Brett Kavanaugh, who I think is probably the front runner in this instance. I think Brett's probably the front runner for the reason that he was Justice Kennedy's clerk in the past. And so if you want to make Justice Kennedy feel like he's going away to a safe place, you could pick one of his proteges to fill the seat.
Can I just say really quickly the idea that because I said a woman should be chosen and you immediately go to that she's not qualified?
I'm not saying she's not qualified.
No, you just said I would.
No, Kristen, that's not what I said.
Let me finish.
Sure.
You just immediately went to, I think, the most qualified person.
I said pick the most qualified.
Let me finish.
Yeah, sure.
You said, I think we should choose the most qualified.
Sure.
I disagree with Kirsten.
Whoever is the most qualified, man or woman,
There's nothing inherently unqualified about a woman.
You're exactly right. Didn't say that.
So why did you say that? Why?
I said we should pick the most qualified, Kristen.
I don't want to hijack the whole show, but why do you do that? Why do you immediately
Because you said we should pick a woman.
Right, a qualified woman. Why
I said let's pick the most qualified person.
You just named a couple men. So
I said let's pick the most qualified person. I said the two people that I know.
I disagree with Kirsten. I think we should choose the most qualified person. That is saying that by saying a woman that there's something. Yes, it is. I'm sorry, it is.
You're not going to make me out to be sexist.
So let me just ask you, we're seeing a lot of politics in this at our table and also on the campaign trail. People are talking about this.
Oh, yeah, man or woman. You mentioned the red state Democrats. There are already a ton of money coming from conservative groups because they were ready for this. Ton of money going toward pressuring these red state Democrats to vote for the president. Not only that, the president himself is hopscotching in their states. He was in North Dakota the other day. He'll be in Montana. It's just starting for them. He'll be in West Virginia. We haven't seen this president really do that sort of campaign to push something through regularly. So this is a big deal.
All right, stick around, everyone. Was the Trump administration testing out the separation of families at the border even before their zero tolerance policy was announced? That's next.
Hi, Bob. Hey, how are you? How are you? Congratulations on everything. We're proud of you. Congratulations. Great job. You went through a tough situation, and I don't think a very fair situation.
That there was actually a prank call. Comedian John Melendez, also known to fans of Howard Stern as Stuttering John, says he pretended to be Democratic Senator Bob Menendez, and he called the White House and eventually got to speak with President Trump on Air Force One. The comedian, who's a regular on the Stern Show, as I said, says that's President Trump congratulating who he thought was the senator for his corruption charges having been cleared up earlier this year. I'm back with the panel. One of the ways that the Menendez people found out about this, that's the actual senator, is that people in legislative affairs yesterday morning called Menendez's office to follow up on this phone call that President Trump had with Senator Menendez, except it wasn't with Senator Menendez.
Well, so Politico is reporting that they actually, Ledge Affairs called Menendez's office before to see, did the senator want to speak to the president? And they're like, no. And then he got put through anyway. So how that happened, I think, is still an open question. But do you know who?
No, well, listen. So shocking, right? Sometimes senators do things and don't tell their staffs, right? I worked for a senator. I assure you, my boss did lots of things that I had no idea, made lots of phone calls, right?
Quite sure that's true. Arlen Specter was his name.
So listen, this president erring on the side of
Menendez calling Trump is like, hey, what's that?
Well, who knows?
No one's saying anything's wrong. But Kirsten, I want you to take a listen because at this point, the comedian, Stuttering John Melendez, pretending to be Democratic Senator Bob Menendez, starts asking the real President Trump who he's going to pick for the Supreme Court.
I'm begging you, are you going to go more moderate or do you think you're going to go more conservative? Well, I haven't looked. I mean, I have a list of people. I have a big list of people, Bob, and we'll take a look at it. And we're going to make a decision. I'll probably make it over the next couple of weeks. Because I promise you, you will have my vote. I will help you if you don't go too conservative. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Well, we will talk to you about it.
We'll talk to you about it. And they followed up with a phone call.
Yeah. I mean, it should have been a tip-off that a Democrat was saying, I'm definitely going to vote for your pick, that something was a little off. So, and also just the idea that that's what Bob Menendez sounds like, right? I mean, I don't know. I feel like
it is from a plane, so that if you
ever
make a call on Air Force One, it's a little scratchy.
Look, President Trump is not somebody who's been in the business for a long time, and I guess he does watch a lot of cable news, though.
He does.
So you would think
and he's been on Stern quite a number of times. Quite a number of times. I want to play some other sound for you because the fake Bob Menendez, real Stuttering John Melendez, asks the very real President Trump about family separation. Take a listen.
My constituents are giving me a lot of beef about this immigration thing. I know that you did something really noble, by trying to, get the kids back with their families. but I have to answer to them. What can I tell them that you're going to do moving forward? So, Bob, let me just tell you, I want to be able to take care of the situation every bit as much as anybody else at the top level. I'd like to do the larger solution rather than the smaller solution. You know, they're doing them step by step. I think we could do the whole thing. You know, I have a good relationship with the party. You have a good relationship with the party. And I think we could do a real immigration bill.
Now, the real Senator Bob Menendez put out a statement saying he would welcome the opportunity to talk to President Trump, but President Trump has sabotaged any attempt to have a real immigration bill.
Right. I was going to say, I think that Paul Ryan might be a little bit dispute with that comment. But yeah, the striking thing is he's asking good questions. None of the questions were, and none of the answers were terribly crazy either, other than the fact that the way the wind blows seems to change what the president thinks about comprehensive immigration reform or immigration bill.
No, those of us who listen to Stern, I mean, this is not typical of the Melendez, stuttering John Melendez oeuvre. I mean,
he's pretty competent asking very good questions. Maybe,
very senatorial.
Maybe he's trying out for a show on CNN. Who knows? I mean, you know.
But President Trump, I don't think in this call does anything to embarrass himself. He handles himself well. If you grant him the idea that that's, of course, not Senator Bob Menendez.
Except for the fact that I think that there were a lot of red flags that this wasn't him, and it's interesting that he wouldn't have. I mean, and Bob Menendez obviously really cares a lot about immigration reform as well, and I think would probably be a little harder on him if they were talking. But you know, Trump was putting it out there that he's open to working on immigration reform, which is sort of what it seems like he does when he's talking to somebody. He sort of tells them what they want to hear, but then when it pushes,
somebody going to get fired for this, though?
No. No.
It depends on who it is.
Like, I mean, not like Jared Kushner, like a phone operator or something.
No, I mean, you would know. Listen,
again.
Depends on whose fault it is. If it's
listen again.
Fired.
Listen again. You got to be in the situation. Senators, right, have their own cell phones. They act independently.
But with a California area code.
Yeah, but they call the White House.
It could have been a burner. They don't ring up the White House and ask to be connected to the president. It's usually organized by age.
Anyway,
my boss, it happens all the time.
Melendez 2020. That's what I say. He doesn't always vote along party lines. So will Senator Rand Paul support the president's pick for the Supreme Court? That's next. Stay with us. In our national lead, the White House is moving quickly to try to find a new Supreme Court justice, hoping to nominate a new one, we are told, by July 9th. With Republicans under pressure to get President Trump his second nomination on the court before the midterm elections. And Senator Rand Paul, Republican of Kentucky, joins me now to talk about the implications for another conservative on the court. Senator, do you think the president's appointment to replace Justice Kennedy will mean, as CNN's Jeffrey Toobin predicted, that Roe versus Wade will be overturned?
You know, I don't really know. I do think that you're going to get somebody from the list of people that we've been seeing. And I think that list includes people who are originalists, who believe in the original or textual interpretation of the Constitution, that it was important what the founders intended. I think that's what you'll get. I also suspect it'll be a very partisan battle, and I suspect that it'll be on party lines. And I think as much as people will try to make it about Roe versus Wade, my belief is probably, I can't imagine anybody coming forward and saying that they have a predetermined opinion on that, because the history of these nominations are people who come forward who say they're going to have an open opinion to looking at all cases that will come before them.
So we invited you on today to talk about the criminal justice system, of which you're a big critic. CNN is preparing to air a new film called American Jail. Here's a little preview.
It's inevitable to end up here.
If the jails were filled with white kids from the suburbs, and then they were making those white kids work for no money, how long do you think that operation would be allowed to last?
The criminal justice system.
Senator, you've made much of your career making criminal justice reform a priority, often criticizing members of your own party. Where do you think President Trump is on this issue? Is he in favor of criminal justice reform?
You know, I've had discussions with the president. I've had the discussions with the president's son-in-law. And the president's son-in-law came in to see me, Jared Kushner, the other day, and he's very much in favor of criminal justice reform. The bill they're looking at takes a small step towards that. I would go much further. I frankly think for nonviolent felonies or nonviolent crimes, particularly drug crimes, that if you've served your time, behaved yourself, we should allow them to expunge this from their criminal record so they don't have to, every time they apply apply for a job. It isn't an impediment to getting a job. This is primarily for nonviolent felonies. But I think there's a lot we can do. I've worked with Cory Booker on things like juveniles. Cory talked to me about juveniles being housed in solitary confinement, how difficult it was. I read the story of Khalif Browder, who ultimately committed suicide, who was kept for 3 years in Rikers Island without a trial. That shouldn't happen in America. I mean, you should get a speedy trial and 3 years in jail without bail. So I've also worked with Kamala Harris on how do we fix bail. You know, should really we have a $3,000 bail for a kid that's got no money?
President Trump recently pardoned Alice Johnson after Kim Kardashian famously urged him to do so. This is a perfect example of the kind of thing you're talking about. There would be less of a need for clemencies such as Ms. Johnson's if there was reform for nonviolent crimes such as drug convictions.
It's one of the things I complimented President Obama on. He did a lot in his second term. Towards the end of his second term, he granted a lot of clemency, and President Trump has started that, and I would encourage President Trump to continue to rectify the terrible inequities of our system. I mean, if you look at drug use in our culture, blacks and whites use drugs at about the same rate, but if you look at our prison population, it's 4 to 5 times greater chance of being in jail if you're black. And it's a function not only of race, but really of poverty. And we need to have a better system. We can't have a system where we're locking up all the young black men in our cities. It's a terrible injustice, and I think we can do a lot better.
Senator Rand Paul, thank you as always. Appreciate it. And tune in to CNN this Sunday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern for the debut of the film American Jail. And tune in Sunday morning to State of the Union. My guests will be Senator Susan Collins and Senator Tammy Duckworth. That's at 9 a.m. and noon Eastern. That's it for The Lead. I turn you over to Wolf Blitzer in the Situation Room. I'll see you Sunday morning.